Hey everybody, welcome to the CBT Nugget series for designing and implementing server infrastructure. This nugget today is all about Virtual Machine Manager, a nice overview of what you get, what you need to set up, and some really cool behind the scenes things that'll really help you manage your virtual machines. One of the big focuses for the 70-413 is going to be on System Center's Virtual Machine Manager. And so we're going to take a real brief look at just some of the features, number one, of what we get with that. The architecture, what is going to be used behind the scenes, what we're going to use like our consoles and what kind of database and how that integrates into that. Then we'll talk a little bit about non-domain joined hosts. Obviously, we have many different types of hosts that are out there in a virtual world. Some are part of your domain, some are not part of your domain. What if they're in a different tree? What if they're even in a different forest? What if they're in a work group? Oh my stars, what would we do? But you can count on the fact that, guess what? VMM treats any host as just a host, and so there's ways that we can get those into our system and start managing them. And then finally, networking components. There is the network fabric, how these all work together, and this is something that really takes the Hyper-V world up to the next level. When we're talking about Virtual Machine Manager, we're talking about a tool that allows you to deploy and manage your entire virtualization infrastructure. You can do things like hosts, storage, networks, libraries. You can use VMM to update servers, and so we can manage whether it's a single virtual machine host computer or 1,000 hosts, and get this, and this is something you might want to remember, up to 25,000 guests or virtual machines. So what you have is essentially a VMM server. You're going to have a VMM database and a VMM console, and we're going to talk a little bit about that here in just a second. These are really what you have to have. Those are the core components that are required for deployment. And now you can do this on a single server, or you can do this on multiple servers. You can have the VMM server, you could have the database over on SQL, and you can use the VMM console just about anywhere else. So some of the things that you can do, and what they really want to concentrate on, is deployment of hosts on bare metal computers. You can literally automate deployment of Windows Server host machines with an installed baseboard management controller, BMC. We can then do System Center 2012 R2 VMM to, again, get your target host resources, configure more networking settings. You can do all those kind of things. Host and cluster creation. You can create Hyper-V hosts and clusters just using the VMM console, which really helps if you're going to be doing a lot of this manually. We have host groups. You can group hosts for both separation. You can have maybe the business side of things, where maybe you have the finance department over here, you've got your sales department over here, and you got maybe your engineering group over there. Well, obviously the engineering group might need a little bit more high-end, so you separate those. This is also going to help you with performance and things like that. You can also do cross-platform management. VMM actually supports, if you want to use Citrix, Citrix and its Xen server, okay? And again, I don't know too much about Xen server and Citrix. That's not my deal, but you can support that, and you can do host, and I think they call them pools, host and pool management instead of host groups. And it also supports, of course, VMware. So you can use ESXi or ESX host through integration with vSphere on the VMware side, okay? Now, by the way, this only works if you're using System Center 2012 on Windows Server 2008 R2 or Windows Server 2012. You can't manage Windows Server 2008 host machines, okay? So you have to go at least 2008 R2 and up for that. Storage configuration and network configuration, you can do that as well. You can do discovery, classification, and provisioning of storage for Hyper-V. You can work with the system management or symmetric multiprocessing storage providers, or SMP. So you can work with that. You can also work with the CIM, which is the Common Information Model. So you can work with that. So if you have these things, that all works real well. Network configuration, you can create logical networks. You can use MAC address pools. You can even use load balancers. This is important, load balancers. Okay, so remember, you can do that with the network configuration. Intelligent placement and dynamic optimization. Those are nice buzzwords, right? Intelligent placement, basically you select an appropriate host based on the VM that you're deploying, and then you rate the hosts against your utilization thresholds and do that. So in other words, oh, I'm placing my host in the right place with the right part of, or I should say right configuration. Dynamic optimization just means that literally VMM will balance your workloads automatically. So you can do core resources like CPU, memory, disk, and network utilization. You can put thresholds in place and then it will balance those out in the VMM environment. And then of course you've got power optimization, the same thing. You can have power thresholds that you can specify. Pro tips, that's your performance and resource optimization. That means you can do preset remediation based on alerts. Okay, and then you've got P2V and V2V. You can do physical to virtual. Okay, that's one of the things you can do, and you can also do virtual to virtual migrations. So that's some built-in functionality that you have with VMM. So remember, the whole goal here for our VMM is to have a management solution for your virtualized data center, right? And so there's going to be a couple of things that you're going to get with this. Obviously, one of the first is your VMM console. This is the program that you use to connect to the VMM management server, and you can view and manage your physical, the hosts, and virtual resources, the guests, including all of those things, virtual machines, services, library resources. That's done through the VMM console. Now the cool thing is that, remember, under the hood of almost everything that we're doing is Windows PowerShell. So the command line interface works real well. You can use commandlets to perform all, by the way, 100% of what you need to do in VMM can be done using Windows PowerShell, okay? And they, by the way, these are VMM specific. So this is VMM specific commands, or commandlets, right? Specific. There we go. I can spell that right. So VMM specific commandlets that you can run. Now the VMM management server, obviously, what do you think? It's the computer on which the service runs. So can you have the VMM console running on a separate computer, running on over here or coming over there and managing that on a separate server? Absolutely. This is where you process the commands, controls the communications with the database and all the hosts. Speaking of the database, that's right here. This is going to be, I wonder what the database is going to be. Oracle? Yeah, right. It's going to be Squeal, or SQL, as we like to do this. It uses a SQL Server database, and you can store all the information, the managed virtual machines, the virtual machine hosts, libraries, jobs, anything that's virtual machine related, guess what? Stored right there in the database. So you have to have that. Otherwise it won't work, and we'll show and demo that when we're actually running the VMM. And then of course the library itself. This is the catalog of resources. This is going to be including things like your VHDs. We have to have our virtual hard disks. We're going to have templates, right? We're going to have templates that we're going to run. That's going to also be in the library. We're also going to maybe put together profiles. Profiles also included in the library, and these are going to be used to deploy these virtual machines, to deploy these services that we have. Now here's the interesting thing. By default, unless you change it, the VMM management server is also going to be where your manager library is. However, you can add additional servers that are just library servers for your catalogs, okay? So you can add those later on. One thing that you really want to remember is when you manage Hyper-V hosts, it's the same for any type of Hyper-V host that you have, but you must install certain hosts through specific procedures, and that just depends on the host location and whether it's a standalone host in a separate forest tree, or maybe you even have these hosts in a perimeter network. So the nice thing is don't worry, you can add Hyper-V hosts that are not in the same domain or domain tree as the VMM management server. That's one thing you need to remember. Now, what are some of these scenarios that we have? Well, take a look. Your Hyper-V hosts are in a separate tree in VMM. So remember, we have our Nugget Lab. So, right, we've got my nuggetlab.com, and that's one domain, right? Maybe that's the forest root, but I have a separate tree over here, still in the same forest, and this is going to be acmeinstruments.com. So I'll put the .com in. Okay, so remember, this is a host. I'll have hosts over here. Okay, so here's my little hosts over here. We're in the same forest, but it is in the same tree. So we're going to need to utilize forest trust relationships, and that way we can get back and forth between these. So that's kind of cool. The other is going to be any untrusted Hyper-V hosts in VMM. Well, think about it. We might have some hosts that come in and we want to be able to have them, but they're untrusted. So what you are going to want to do is actually use a specific run as account for the untrusted domains Hyper-V hosts. So what you do is you have local administrative rights on the Hyper-V host itself, and then it allows you to differentiate between the permissions of the trusted domain account and the permissions of the untrusted domain. Because remember, that would be another domain over here. Maybe I've got, James Conrad over here, and he's got his, His Earth, My Pictures, or something like that. I'm probably saying it wrong. In fact, James Conrad's actually on our little virtual environment right here, and he'll probably send me a text here in just a second going, dude, you got my domain wrong. Anyway, check out James Conrad's Nugget series, and you're going to catch some of that, okay? So you've got that one. Well, obviously, that's not something that's within my forest or a tree, or even it's a separate forest, and so I need to be able to run those, right? So in the Add Resource Wizard, we would put in an untrusted Active Directory domain and then select the Windows Server Computer Radio button and then use the Run As account. Okay, and then when you run through the actual wizard over here in the thing, you'll go through the standard replies on yes, 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 and everything else. Now you can also do Hyper-V hosts in a perimeter network in VMM. Now think about it. If you're in a DMZ and you have the inside firewall and then you have the outside firewall, both of those are going to have certain rules that either allow or block certain packets depending on the settings that you've put into place. And so certain servers are going to need to be allowed access from outside entities, and they're living in the perimeter network. And so the outside rules has the rules to allow the access, but the inside firewall would then block the same packets trying to get into the internal resources. So in most cases, if you have servers in the perimeter network, they're not domain joined, right? Because you don't want the hacker to have an entry point into your domain. And so what are you going to have to do? You're going to have to pretty much go in and install it. Now there is an optional installation, and so you're going to use a local agent hyperlink, and it's going to do the host is on a perimeter network checkbox, and then it's going to ask for encryption keys and a whole bunch of stuff that you're going to put in together. And again, this is beyond the scope of what we need to do for this series, but just so you understand, that's how they're going to do it. Now the neat thing is once you've added these things, you can manage them right here in the VMM management server through the console. And so that's really easy. It's just getting them in first that you need to think about it first and have a plan. Well, like I thought, James Conrad was watching out over there on his trainer cam, and he saw me and talked to me about it, and he says, dude, it's hisearthmyworld.com. So there you go. I felt bad. I had to make up for my mistake here with James. By the way, James is not only an incredible Microsoft instructor, take a look at some of these shots. He is fantastic as a photographer. I don't know if you can order these online or not, but maybe get some prints. They got some really cool stuff there. But anyway, so checking that out. Let's talk a little bit about networking components with our networking fabric. Think about it. You need these resources in order to create, model, organize your network connectivity. Think about it. You got a physical environment and you also have a virtualized environment. So obviously, here we go, grab my little pen here. You've got your logical networks, which are going to be important. You have a logical network objects that you're going to model your network environments on. So think about this. You can do like a perimeter logical network. You can do a development logical network, and then you maybe do a finance department logical network, and then you associate that with one or more host groups. You've got the network sites. Remember, network sites, anytime you hear the term sites, pretty much in this environment, you're talking about subnets, right? Subnets in virtual local area networks with locations, departments, and then you can associate the sites with that logical network. Static IP address pools, just like it sounds like. You can add static IP address, pool those, and assign them. Now, when you do that, you're going to pretty much be running this with static MAC addresses to the virtual network devices. Because remember, these are virtual. They're not, you don't really have a card, a physical card with a physical MAC address, and so you have static MAC address pools that you can use. By the way, this works whether you're running Hyper-V, VMware ESX, or even Xen server hosts. And by the way, VMM has two default static MAC address pools. You have the one for Hyper-V and Xen server, and you have one for the VMware MAC address pool, which deals with the ESX hosts. Okay? By the way, only use default static MAC address pools if you set the MAC address type for a virtual machine to static. If you do it on dynamic, the hypervisor is going to assign the MAC address, which, okay, obviously that defeats the purpose. Virtual IP templates, not very important person templates. Virtual IP templates will allow you to have a load balancer and a configuration setting for specific types of network traffic. For example, maybe over here you wanted to do QoS for voice traffic, okay, or video traffic. And so you want to be able to handle that. Well, it'll do that with these templates, which also means that you can do load balancing. So with a load balancer, you can load balance requests to your virtual machines. You can use network load balancing, or you can even use a hardware load balancer through the VMM console. Okay, so that's kind of cool. So you can come on over here, and let's say you have a console here, and you can operate that load balancer right there. Logical switches. The nice thing about having logical switches versus a physical switch, see here's the icon for the physical switch. The nice thing is you can do a single configuration to many different hosts. You can do logical to Hyper-V port profiles, uplink profiles, port classification, and then even use virtual switch extensions, which are kind of cool, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But Hyper-V port profiles, port classifications, port profiles, you can create two in VMM. You can do a virtual network adapter port profile, say that 13 times fast, which can be used for virtual machines and hosts. You can do configurable offload, security, bandwidth settings on those, or you can do uplink port profiles, and this is going to be using obviously uplink ports. So if you're going to do load balancing, if you're going to do networking teaming or network teaming on that, you can do that. Now the network service in VMM has a whole bunch of components that you see here: gateways, switch extensions, network managers, and TOR, or top of the rack switches. Gateways are basically a way for you to allow network traffic in and out of a virtual machine network using network virtualization. So you can configure it for maybe local network routing. So you're going to route traffic between the virtual machine network and the physical network. That makes sense. The virtual switch extensions are kind of cool. Think about this. Cisco has created the Nexus, I think it's the 1000V, okay? This is used for Hyper-V. Cisco literally created this, and what this enables you to do is Cisco guys can configure networking in VMM by using Cisco commands. So if you're a big Cisco iOS guy like Jeremy Chara, Keith Barker, or Scott Morris, you can utilize that. It's kind of cool. Then there's network managers. Network managers allow you to use non-Microsoft network management consoles to configure things like forwarding extensions. You can do logical network sites, virtual machine networks, and all that. Top of the rack switches are basically enabling you to control physical switch ports. You can create corresponding VLANs, apply it to the physical port, and that way your physical and virtual switch settings will be synchronized because you're utilizing this where? In your VMM. Well, that kind of gave you the overview of VMM, and I know that we talked a little bit of high-level stuff. Don't worry, we'll dive into maybe some subsequent nuggets here and do some demos. But I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for joining me.